Today, we're plunging into, well, one of the most infamous corporate scandals in history, the collapse of Enron.
Sorry.
Now, you probably know the broad strokes,
Right.
massive corporate fraud, the eventual downfall, the billions lost.
Mm-hmm.
But our mission today is to go beyond those headlines. We're going to really unpack this by uncovering the crucial, maybe lesser-known details from our sources. The goal is to give you a truly well-informed view of how and why Enron became what it was.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is that the Enron story isn't just a simple tale of fraud. It's really an exploration of how incredibly complex systems can unravel when core principles, particularly ethical ones, are fundamentally abandoned. So what might seem like a straightforward story actually has, well, many surprising layers. It reveals just how deeply rooted the issues really were.
Okay, so let's start where the illusion truly began, how Enron cooked its books. I mean, originally this was a pretty straightforward natural gas pipeline company, right? But what did our sources uncover about the dramatic shift in its business by the late 1990s, where most of its reported profits were coming from something called mark-to-market accounting?
That's a crucial point. Mark-to-market accounting essentially allowed Enron to book potential future profits from long-term energy contracts as current income.
Potential future profits.
Yes.
As current income.
Yes. Think of it like this. If Enron signed, say, a 10-year deal that they estimated would generate $1 billion in profit over that whole decade,
Okay.
they could record that entire $1 billion as profit immediately, right then and there on their current financial statements.
Wow. Instantly.
Instantly. It didn't matter if they hadn't seen a dime yet, or even if the market later shifted and they never actually earned that full amount.
So it just created this massive illusion.
A massive, often fictional illusion of vast wealth and profitability.
Yeah. Okay, so if mark-to-market was painting this incredible, maybe fictional picture, how did they actually hide the growing piles of debt? Because that must have been happening, right? These speculative profits.
Absolutely. That's where the infamous special purpose entities, or SPEs, come in.
Yeah, the SPEs. Our sources mention names that almost sound like, I don't know, code names. JDI, Chewco, LJM1, LJM2.
They do sound a bit cloak and dagger, don't they?
Yeah.
And you're right, the SPEs were key. These were technically off-the-books entities, meaning they weren't fully consolidated into Enron's main financial statements.
Yeah.
They were designed to appear independent, but the reports reveal they were actually controlled by Enron executives.
Ah, okay.
Their main purpose was really twofold. One, to hide billions in debt from Enron's balance sheet, keeping it off the main books.
Right, hide the bad stuff.
And simultaneously, to inflate profits. They even used them to create these sort of artificial transactions, effectively selling assets back and forth between Enron and these SPEs to manufacture fake profits that looked real to outside investors.
Selling assets to themselves, basically.
Pretty much. It was incredibly complex, but that was the gist.
And it wasn't just complex financial engineering. Here's where our sources say it gets really interesting. A massive conflict of interest involving Enron's CFO, Andrew Fastow. How on earth was this allowed to happen?
It's truly astonishing when you look back. Andrew Fastow, Enron's chief financial officer, the guy in charge of the company's finances, was actually running some of these very SPEs himself.
Wait, he was running the outside entities?
Exactly. So he was both an Enron executive and supposedly an outside business partner dealing with Enron.
That's blatant.
It's an enormous conflict of interest, and the information shows that this wasn't some hidden secret internally. It was known within Enron.
Known and ignored.
Actively tolerated and ignored. Why? Because, well, for a time, these arrangements were profitable, or at least appeared highly profitable. They allowed the company to report these impressive earnings figures, even as it completely undermined any semblance of proper oversight or ethical conduct.
So the profits papered over the massive conflict.
For a while, yes,
Yeah.
until it all came crashing down.
Okay, so beyond the complex schemes and the executive conflicts, our sources really reveal a devastating human element to the story. Particularly for the employees, right? They bore the brunt of this collapse. What happened to them?
It's just heartbreaking. While top executives like Ken Lay and Jeff Skilling were selling millions upon millions of dollars in Enron stock before the company's collapse, often very quietly.
Cashing out while they could.
Exactly. The vast majority of employees were in a terrible, terrible bind. Their retirement accounts, their 401ks, were heavily, sometimes entirely invested in Enron stock.
Oh, no.
And worse, they were explicitly encouraged by management, even told repeatedly to keep buying more Enron stock. Show your confidence, it's undervalued.
The execs were selling.
While the execs were quietly selling. So when Enron finally imploded, just like that, thousands of these dedicated employees lost their entire life savings, everything.
Just wiped out.
Completely wiped out.
And in the midst of this unfolding disaster, a crucial voice emerged from inside the company itself. The whistleblower, Sharon Watkins. What did she actually do?
Sharon Watkins, she was a vice president at Enron at the time, and she took an incredibly brave step in 2001.
Right.
She directly warned Ken Lay, the chairman, about the accounting irregularities she had uncovered. She didn't just mention it. She famously wrote a memo.
There's a memo, yeah.
Explicitly calling Enron a house of cards ready to fall. Pretty stark language.
You can't get much clearer than that. And Lay...
Despite her clear and really urgent warning, it was essentially ignored, brushed aside. Yeah. And worse, she was unfortunately sidelined within the company for speaking out.
Punished for doing the right thing.
Sadly, yes. It really highlights the internal culture.
So with all that financial pressure, the need to keep profits looking high and then suppressing dissent like Watkins is, what kind of internal environment did that actually create at Enron day to day?
Well, the documentation paints a picture of a truly toxic internal culture. Very high pressure.
How so?
Enron famously had this system called rank and yank. Employees were aggressively ranked against each other constantly.
Rank and yank.
Yeah. And a significant percentage, often the bottom 15 to 20%, based on those rankings, were fired annually, every year.
Wow, that's brutal.
Incredibly brutal. It created this intensely high-pressure, sort of cutthroat environment where job security was minimal. And furthermore, any criticism or even questioning of the company's aggressive accounting methods, well, that often led directly to an employee being fired or effectively silenced.
So no room for questioning.
Very little. It essentially eliminated any internal checks or balances that just might, have prevented the eventual collapse, or at least sounded the alarm sooner.
And of course, a scandal of this magnitude. It usually isn't just the company itself, right? Our sources reveal quite a bit about external parties who also played significant roles, maybe as enablers.
Absolutely. You can't talk about Enron without talking about their auditor, Arthur Andersen LLP.
Right, the accounting firm.
A huge respected firm at the time. But they were deeply complicit. Reports show they consistently approved Enron's highly questionable, very aggressive accounting practices. They gave Enron that critical stamp of legitimacy.
So they signed off on it.
They signed off on it. But what really sealed Andersen's fate was the shredding scandal in late 2001.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that.
As federal investigations into Enron began heating up, Andersen employees were caught destroying literally tons of Enron-related documents, shredding them.
Trying to cover their tracks.
That's certainly how it looked. This ultimately led to Andersen's criminal conviction for obstruction of justice, although that conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court on a technicality.
Right.
But the damage was done. The firm, Arthur Andersen, completely collapsed as a result. One of the biggest accounting firms in the world, gone.
Wow. And we can't ignore the political dimensions either, can we? The sources touch on Enron's extensive political connections. What did they reveal about that influence?
Yeah, that's another layer. The information highlights that Enron was a major political donor. Huge amounts of money.
To both parties?
Yes, contributing millions of dollars to both Democratic and Republican campaigns and politicians. Ken Lay, Enron's chairman, had particularly close ties with President George W. Bush. You might remember the media nickname for him, Kenny Boy.
I do remember that. So what's the implication there?
Well, the implication presented in the sources, and we're just reporting what's there, is that this significant political influence may have helped Enron expand aggressively and operate with less scrutiny for years, perhaps delaying the kind of regulatory oversight that might have uncovered their practices sooner.
So access bought influence, potentially.
That's the suggestion raised by some observers cited in the material. It's important to present that impartially, of course.
Right. What's also surprising, maybe, is the sheer scale of Enron's global reach. This wasn't just a U.S. problem, was it? The sources mention issues in many of its international projects.
No, not at all. Enron had operations all over the world, and frankly, many of them were similarly plagued with controversy and ultimately failure.
Like where?
For instance, in India, they had a massive power project in Dabhol. It faced widespread local protests, intense political backlash over costs and contracts, and it ultimately failed spectacularly. And the company also had other controversial or failed projects in countries like Argentina, Nigeria, Brazil, the UK.
Yeah.
It shows that their problematic business practices and maybe overreach extended far beyond their U.S. operations as a global pattern.
Okay, now for something a bit unexpected that came up in the sources, amidst all this fraud and failure, there was apparently a less known, almost positive technological innovation that actually came out of Enron. What was that about?
Yeah, this is a truly fascinating detail, and it often gets overlooked in the scandal narrative. Enron actually pioneered online trading for commodities.
Online trading?
Yes, for electricity, natural gas, weather derivatives, all sorts of things, with the platform they built called Enron Online. It launched in 1999. And incredibly quickly, it became the largest online business-to-business platform globally. Huge transaction volumes.
So it was actually innovative, successful.
The platform itself was innovative, yes,
Yeah.
a technological leap. However, and this is the Enron twist, even this groundbreaking innovation was ultimately used, in part, to inflate Enron's perceived success and trading volume. It helped bolster the image, often without real sustainable profits consistently following those massive trading volumes. So it kind of raises an important question, doesn't it, about how even powerful innovation can be misused when the ethical foundations of a company are, well, compromised.
So even the good stuff got tangled up in the bad.
Very much so.
So after all of this, the schemes, the collapse, the human costs, the enabling parties, what ultimately happened to the key players? And maybe more importantly, what does this whole saga mean for the corporate world today? What's the legacy?
Well, let's look at the executives. Jeff Skilling, Enron's former CEO, was sentenced to 24 years in prison. He ultimately served about 12 years after reductions. Andrew Fastow, the CFO who ran those SPEs, he served 5 years of his original 6-year sentence. He cooperated extensively with prosecutors.
Boy, and Ken Blay.
Ken Lay, the chairman, Kenny Boy, he was convicted on multiple counts, but he actually died of a heart attack before his sentencing hearing.
Oh, wow.
And because of the legal principle, his conviction was technically vacated, wiped clean after his death.
Huh. So what's the lasting impact then?
The enduring legacy of Enron's collapse is immense. It wasn't just this one company imploding. It fundamentally shook confidence in corporate America and led directly to major corporate governance reforms.
Like what specifically?
Most notably, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002, often just called SOX.
SOX, right. I've heard of that.
It was a landmark piece of legislation. It implemented much stricter rules on things like auditor independence, trying to prevent another Arthur Andersen situation, stronger internal controls within companies, and significantly increased executive accountability for financial reporting.
Yeah.
CEOs and CFOs now have to personally certify their company's financial statements. It really did fundamentally change how corporations operate and are overseen today.
So real changes came out of it.
Absolutely. Hard-won changes born from a massive failure.
Well, this deep dive has certainly uncovered some impactful sort of unseen depths, hasn't it? From the precise accounting tricks like mark-to-market and those intricate SPEs.
JDI and Chewco.
Right. To the devastating human cost on employees, the shocking complicity of auditors like Arthur Andersen, those tangled political connections, and even that surprising yet ultimately misused innovation of Enron Online. It's quite a web.
It really is. And it makes you think, doesn't it? Considering Enron's unique combination of sophisticated innovation, deep ethical decay, and broad external influence. Well, what might be the next house of cards forming today? Perhaps hiding in plain sight within a similarly complex system, maybe in a different industry entirely.
That's definitely something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Enron scandal. We hope you continue to explore the complexities, the sometimes uncomfortable complexities of the world around you.